Welcome back to the story of Anzac Sons. In the first episode, 1915 had come to an end. The Anzacs had been withdrawn from Gallipoli and George was training in Egypt. Let's see what happens in 1916. At home in Marlow, Alan and Percy were anxious to serve their king and country. At the age of 20, they signed up to the new 3rd Division, being formed in Australia, and were appointed to the 38th Battalion of the 10th Brigade. Charlie made another attempt to enlist, but was once again turned away. As his brothers adjusted to their new life in the training camps of Bendigo and Melbourne, on the other side of the world, George was on his way to the Western Front. By April, George had experienced life in the trenches as he wrote home to his family. The Australians were positioned in the front line near the border between France and Belgium, an area known as Flanders. This is a little section of a letter that he wrote. There hasn't been many of our troops killed yet. The guns do roar at times. Last night our guns were letting a few go and my word, they did make a row. Well, Alan, the censor is very strict here, so I can't tell you anything. I hope they send the addresses of my relatives in England, as I stand a chance of getting a trip over there after being in the firing line a certain time. George tells us a few things there. That letters sent by soldiers from the Western Front were censored. They had to be checked to make sure that they weren't giving away important information. He also tells us how excited he is to be able to head to England if he gets a chance. 2 months later, in Australia, Alan and Percy were preparing for their departure. Their youngest brother Albert had now made at least 2 attempts to enlist while underage. Until he turned 21, he required the approval of his parents. On June 20, the twins and their mates from Marlow left Australia's shores on board the HMAT Runic. Many of these young men would not come home. And here are some of the Marlow brothers, Alan and Percy, with some of their mates before they sailed. I'm messing around in that photo. Alan and Percy were settling into their long 6-week journey when British troops were ordered to attack the German front line in an area of France known as the Somme. On the first day of July, 19,240 British soldiers were killed and over 38,000 were injured. In the following devastating fortnight, over 100,000 British men were listed as killed, wounded or missing. Those figures are just staggering, aren't they? The 1st, 2nd and 4th Australian Divisions were rushed to the Somme to aid the embattled Allied soldiers. George was with the 1st Division as they waited for their orders. The 5th Division remained near the border, close to a village called Fromelles. It was at Fromelles where the Australians made their first attack on the Western Front. On July 19th, the soldiers of the 5th Division were ordered to storm the well-fortified German lines in full daylight. The attack was a disaster. Australia suffered 5,533 casualties in 24 hours. Today, the Battle of Fromelles is regarded as the worst 24 hours in Australia's military history. To the south of Fromelles, the German-held village of Pozières sat perched high on a ridge in the Somme Valley. On the night of July 23rd, the 1st Division attacked the enemy positions. By dawn, they had reached the centre of the village. The big guns of the German artillery responded with a severe and relentless bombardment to recapture the lost stronghold. The village was turned to rubble. as the Australians staunchly held on to their positions. 4 days later, when George was withdrawn with the surviving Australians, the 1st Division had suffered over 5,000 casualties. If you look carefully, you can see the village of Pozières before the war and the village here after the battles that raged around it. The battle raged at Pozières for 7 weeks as the Australian divisions pushed on. 6,741 Australians had been killed. George had been lucky. As George was fighting for his life at Pozières and the twins were steaming towards England, Charlie broke the news to his family at home that he had enlisted. He was appointed to the 38th Battalion. He would be joining his brothers as a member of the 3rd Division. Just weeks before he departed, Charlie proposed to and married his sweetheart. As he boarded the ship and as the Shropshire pulled away from the pier, Charlie was not aware that his young wife was expecting their baby. And there's Charlie and Pearl on their wedding day. 3 days after Charlie sailed, Albert convinced his parents to give their permission for him to enlist. Sarah and Charles may have believed that Australian men would soon be conscripted to the AIF and be forced to become soldiers, as was the case in other Allied countries. The federal government asked Australians to vote to change the laws which prevented compulsory overseas service, but the majority of Australians voted against conscription. The AIF was to remain one of the few Allied fighting forces to be dependent upon volunteers. They were citizen soldiers with little time for pettiness and polish. Only 4 weeks later, Albert sailed for England on board the Port Lincoln to also join the 38th Battalion. So Alan, Percy, Charlie and Albert were all serving together. Once in England, Alan, Percy and their mates began training at the Larkhill military camp within walking distance of the prehistoric monument of Stonehenge. Like their fellow Australians, they delighted in seeing the famous sights of England. The twins also took the opportunity to meet their English relatives. This is something that Alan actually wrote on his postcard here. We do not know when we are going away. I'm ready to go any time. Jim says in his letter that Albert has enlisted. I never thought you would let him go. He didn't want his youngest brother to enlist as well. While Alan and Percy looked forward to the arrival of Charlie, they were shocked to discover that Albert had enlisted. Alan wrote to Albert, "Well, Albert, I heard that you went and enlisted again. What did I tell you before I left? Albert, you were foolish, you know. There is enough of us here now." Albert arrived at Larkhill in the final days of 1916, but his brothers had already left for the Western Front. He was bitterly disappointed and wrote to his parents, "I expected to see Charlie. 50 of the 38th were left behind, and they told me that Charlie had gone to France. I was never so disappointed in all my life." He left a note behind. And this is a telegram that Albert sent to his parents to let them know that he had arrived in England. Visiting his relatives and the sights he had read about in school soon cheered Albert. Better still was the moment when George, on 10 days' leave in England, arrived at the training camp. The brothers' hope of spending more precious time together was crushed when Albert was hospitalised with the mumps. As winter approached on the Western Front, the autumn rains transformed the powdered battlefields into a quagmire. Trenches and shell holes filled with mud. Roads and routes to the front line were impassable. Exhausted troops sank with every step. Standing to their knees in the mud of the trenches, the troops were about to endure a fearsome winter. George was positioned near Pozières on the Somme, where the bitterly cold conditions could freeze a pannikin of hot tea in 1 minute. It would be the coldest winter recorded in 40 years. Imagine that, being outside, it was so cold, and in trenches with mud around you. Here's some field postcards. Sometimes the soldiers, instead of writing letters, they would send a really quick field postcard home to their family. Girls and boys, we'll end that here for today. Next time, in episode 3,